Released in 2004, Invasion of Chaos is one of the most iconic Yu-Gi-Oh sets of all time. Not only did it have a bunch of powerful cards for different deck types, but also it solidified what a Chaos monster should be, and we're still kind of using those rules to this day. The basic identity of cards like Blackluster Soldier and Chaos Emperor Dragon and Chaos Sorcerer are still seen in modern Chaos cards. Over the years, we've seen more and more monsters that follow that basic outline, things like Light Pulsar Dragon and the baby Chaos Dragons, and even more recent cards like Chaos Dragon Legionnaire. But it's not even just the Chaos monsters themselves. Konami over the years has released many different archetypes that deal with light and dark monsters specifically. Things like Thunder Dragons, where half the archetype is light and half the archetype is dark. Obviously you're going to find a natural fit with cards like Chaos Dragon Legionnaire. And don't get me wrong, I love Chaos monsters. I've used them in a whole bunch of decks over the years, and obviously very recently I've talked about the Chaos Creator and just Toon Chaos in general a lot because I really like those new cards. But I feel like Konami has severely underutilized a different type of Chaos monster, the Elemental Chaos monsters, of which they've only ever printed 3 in all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history. And I'm not talking about things like Aqua Spirit, because while it does sort of emulate what a Chaos monster does, it's only banishing water monsters. The Dragon Rulers also do not fall under this category, because while they do give you the option of 2 different things to banish, you also could just banish 2 dragon monsters or 2 wind monsters. It doesn't have to be one of each. The new Arch Nemesis boss monsters are pretty close to what I'm talking about, but those are a little bit too generic. In my opinion, an Elemental Chaos monster should force you to play 2 specific attributes, very similar to how you're forced to play light and dark monsters with the regular Chaos monsters. The very first Elemental Chaos monsters were both released in Tactical Evolution back in 2007. You had, of course, Frost and Flame Dragon and Desert Twister. I think a lot of people actually have heard of at least one of these cards, and these were really like supposed to be the start of something new. These cards were obviously based off of Chaos Sorcerer. They share the same attack, defense, and level of that previously released card, but they're just not that good, even by old school standards. You see, Chaos Sorcerer at this point had been out for several years, and these cards are just much worse. What's surprising about this is that they actually made their summoning requirements even worse than Chaos Sorcerer, despite not having as good of on-field ability. So Frost and Flame Dragon says cannot be normal summon / set, must be special summon from your hand by banishing 1 fire and 2 water monsters, so 1 more than Chaos Sorcerer or BLS or Chaos Emperor Dragon requires, from your graveyard, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. Once per turn, you can discard 1 card to target 1 monster on the field to destroy that target. Desert Twister is pretty similar to Frost and Flame Dragon in several ways, but you have to banish 2 wind monsters and 1 earth monster to special summon it, and its discarding effect is to target a spell or trap card on the field, not a monster card, and destroy it. So these cards are pretty bad, not only in comparison to Chaos Sorcerer, but just in comparison to other cards of this time period. I'm also not a fan that the Frost and Flame Dragon kind of implies that you should play more water monsters than fire monsters, and that Desert Twister implies you should play more wind monsters than earth monsters. I think the original Chaos monsters got it right by just having you banish 1 light and 1 dark. Obviously, newer cards like Chaos Dragon Legionnaire give you many options, but I feel like for the first addition to these new types of strategies, you really want players to experiment with all the different types of decks that you can play these cards in, but by making them each have 1 extra banish requirement of 1 of the attributes, it makes it a little bit more difficult to actually do that compared to things like Chaos Sorcerer or Blackluster Soldier. Probably the biggest issue though with these cards, even by old school standards, is that there's no real reason to build a deck using these different attributes because the payoff is just not worth it. When you think of the big Chaos monsters in the past for light and dark decks, there's some really powerful iconic monsters, but these cards just don't have it. I mean, sure, their effects aren't that terrible, but even ignoring the discard cost, they're worse than the average Chaos monster for light and darks. Then you add on the discard cost, and now they're looking really bad. They have already inherently worse abilities, and now you add a cost that the other cards don't have, and then you put them in a deck or a deck type that doesn't have nearly as much support as light and dark monsters. Needless to say, these cards did pretty bad at tournaments. You certainly had some people trying out water and fire decks because Frost and Flame Dragon is clearly the better of these 2 monsters, but even those just didn't make a lot of sense. Konami pretty much completely abandoned the idea of Elemental Chaos monsters for a very long time. It wouldn't be until 12 years later in Dark Neostorm where we finally got a new Elemental Chaos monster, and you know what, this one isn't as bad, but obviously Yu-Gi-Oh! Changed a lot in those 12 years. Loud Cloud the Storm Serpent is out of Dark Neostorm, as I said. It's a water level 5 monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense. Cannot be normal summoned or set, must first be special summoned from your hand by banishing 1 fire and 1 wind monster from your graveyard. You can only use each of the following effects of Loud Cloud the Storm Serpent once per turn. You can banish 1 fire monster from your graveyard, then target 1 monster your opponent controls, destroy that monster, and if you do, this card gains attack equal to the destroyed monster's original attack. You can banish 1 wind monster from your graveyard, then target 1 card in your opponent's spell and trap card zone, destroy it. I really like this card for a lot of reasons. First, I think the pairing of fire and wind is really interesting and maybe not what you would expect from an elemental chaos monster, and I also really enjoy how the on-field effects of this card actually gain you advantage and are pretty good even by modern standards, despite the fact that this card is like 10 times better than Frost and Flame Dragon or Desert Twister. It also didn't see any competitive play. There are 2 big reasons that this card by itself was not enough to make a wind/fire deck actually competitively viable. The first reason is that it's not enough of a payoff. Yes, it is better than Desert Twister, and yes, it is better than Frost and Flame Dragon, but this card isn't game breaking. It's just a solid card for some decks if they actually could use it, but it's not good enough to actually dedicate an entire strategy around fire and wind monsters. It's obviously unfair to compare this card to the newer Toon Chaos support, but even comparing it to things like Chaos Dragon Levianeer or the baby Chaos Dragons, or even old school cards like Chaos Sorcerer, just makes it look pretty bad. That's not to say it wouldn't be played in a fire/wind strategy, but it's not enough to build an entire deck just to summon this one card. The other big problem is that there isn't a good combination strategy with fire and wind monsters. You could certainly take a fire archetype and combine it with a wind archetype and make a deck that used this card, but it wouldn't actually be that good. When you think of like the many light and dark strategies, a lot of them actually already are inherently light and dark. I think of like Thunder Dragons and stuff like that. You're already playing both attributes, so you might as well play cards like Chaos Dragon Levianeer in those decks. In other words, this thing isn't powerful enough by itself to actually make a deck around it. And also, there aren't any decks right now that are competitively viable playing a lot of fire and wind monsters, so you can't just tech this card into one of those strategies. That puts it in a very difficult position and basically makes it unplayable in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! But I really do feel like the elemental chaos monsters have a lot of potential. You even could do something like banish a fire and a dark monster, or banish a fire and a light monster, sort of half and half, and that would be really cool as well. Basically, I think that I would like to see more elemental chaos monsters explored in Yu-Gi-Oh! But more importantly, I want to see decks that actually take advantage of 2 different attributes that maybe aren't always light and dark. We've seen so many different chaos decks, and while those are very cool, what about a wind water deck with a crazy new elemental chaos monster? That would be pretty interesting. Pokemon has done dual types, Magic has tons of cards that take different types of lands to summon, so I think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Really could take advantage of this interesting mechanic. Konami would have to put in a lot of effort to make these decks work. You'd have to have really strong generic boss monsters that go into a lot of different decks. You'd have to have archetypes that use 2 different attributes that aren't necessarily light and dark, and that obviously takes time and energy and effort and a whole new way of looking at things, but I think that the payoff would be really, really cool. Konami obviously could release a structure deck or a core set with a bunch of meta-defining elemental chaos monsters, but that's not really how I see it. I think that Konami would have to print over the course of many years a bunch of different archetypes that use 2 different attributes in unique ways that actually make sense. I don't know, maybe Konami just wants chaos monsters to be light and dark monsters, and that's fine. A lot of them are really cool, and a lot of them are very iconic monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, but I really feel like elemental chaos monsters could be something cool. They just need a lot more support. I first started thinking about this when I was going to make a video that was like 5 abandoned themes in Yu-Gi-Oh, and this is going to be one of them, but I wanted to make an entire video talking about only elemental chaos monsters because I feel they deserve the attention. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching today's discussion video on elemental chaos monsters. Feel free to let me know what you feel could actually improve the elemental chaos monsters in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your guys' ideas about what Konami could do to expand on this sort of forgotten series of monsters. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.